Welcome back to Track Talk. We're back for week two recap of the 1830 League. We're a little bit behind schedule, but we're going to jump right into Game A. We have some new players this week. One of them is in this game, Physics Squirrel. Pretty skilled player. Expect him to do well in the tournament. So we will just see how he gets off to a start here. The auction of this game is not all that remarkable. We can buzz through that pretty quickly. It's a fairly divided auction, pretty early pull, and the privates all mostly go for reasonable values. So we get into OR1, and OR1 is notable because we end up getting a four-company float. So DAK should not really be able to float the B&O here, but actually he gets a little bit of help, and we will buzz through this and note that Devouring Trey has bought one share in the B&O, and as a result, DAK is going to be able to float in OR1. I think that this is usually a bad idea to help another player float their company, but in this particular instance, Devouring Trey is still able to float his own company, and he does hurt Physics Squirrel on the B&O, or on the PRR by giving him a little bit of competition for Lancaster in the B&O. So could be a next level play. We'll see how this kind of develops, but I don't hate giving the PRR a little bit of competition. We've also talked about this before, but floating the NYNH high at 71 allows the other players to float high, then still operate behind you. So not always a great idea to float high with your first company. Regardless, we're going to see these players continue to float. Devouring Trey has gone back and is now going to be floating the Chesapeake and Ohio. So not only has he helped the B&O, he's going to be operating last in operating order and may have an early buy in his private now that four companies have floated and he's going last. So I kind of like this start for Devouring Trey. I think it's potentially pretty sneaky. And he also has the Delaware and Hudson teleport, which we will see a lot of this week. Spoiler alert. So we'll round out this stock round. Everybody floats, not too much else interesting. B&O is now first up, and we will see everybody buy their two trains, and pretty standard track. PRR actually buys two trains, a little bit less typical, and C&O is heading into Chicago, so no surprises there. C&O, I should say, did have the opportunity of buying into the threes and buying his private for pretty close to max. I think it would be max value, but neglected to do so. So I think that is probably a mistake. He would have a lot more money into the stock round, could buy paying shares in other companies, and potentially sell down a C&O and even float another company, but neglected to do that. Nobody has that much cash in the stock round. Should be pretty quick. And we are back into operating round two. So now we've got a little bit of a prisoner's dilemma, so to speak, where the players early in priority need to consider buying into the twos, even if they can't run them or otherwise wouldn't be motivated to, just because if they don't, they're worried that someone behind them will, and then everybody else will buy in their privates. And the only thing worse than missing a private buy-in, looking at the C&O player here, is missing your private buy-in and then having the other players still be able to buy their privates in, because now you're doubly behind. So the B&O player, well, not so much the B&O player, but the NYNH player in particular, I'm looking at, is under a little bit of pressure here to buy in his privates, and we'll see if that actually happens. DAK on the B&O is going to race up to Lancaster. Bad news for the PRR player if the NYNH player does not buy into the threes, because the PRR player is going to be blocked at Lancaster, likely until Brown. So we'll see what the NYNH player does here. This is potentially consequential for both him and basically the whole table. Huge decision here. He pays it out, does not buy, and this decision to me is really hard to explain. You got $220 worth of private value that you're just sitting on. Why not buy the trains? I don't know. But we actually will see the rest of the players are going to agree with that analysis, and nobody buys any trains. So we have a stall on the twos, which is it's strange to me. It's hard for me to explain as a commentator. I would, if I was playing in the game, I'd never really do that. So we are into stock round three. And because nobody bought in their privates, there's not going to be a whole lot to say about the stock round. Everybody's just going to get one share, basically. So everyone's looking at the C&O. Devouring Trey sells out of the B&O. Not entirely sure what the rationale there is, and is going for the NYNH. This is going to lose Devouring Trey priority. He's going to be on last and give DAK priority here. But actually, Physics Squirrel is going to make a little adjustment in his portfolio as well at the last second, and we will see Devouring Tray, it looks like, end up with priority. Yep. So OR3, green has still not broken, but we will see it here. B&O is satisfied with the status quo. It's not going to lay any track. It would be very expensive to lay down to Washington. Really not much benefit to him. He is going to sit on his trains. We'll see if anybody else wants to buy any trains. And NYNH still not motivated to. This is really interesting to me. I don't know why you wouldn't buy your trains. PRR can only head west and does so. He runs a single train, and we commented that he had bought two trains, and I'll just point out that he's only been able to run one of them all game. So you got to be careful about buying these two trains and not having the trains rush to open up green. Otherwise, you just kind of waste money. CNO, I believe he does eventually buy in, yes. So 2 operating rounds after I would have expected, we do see the CNO player buy in his privates, and he is now going to be in the driver's seat into this operating round. He also has priority, so has his choice. Does he want to just spread his cash around, or does he want to float another company and push trains a little bit? So he is selling out, which is telling me that he's probably going to be floating a company, and he floats the NYC. If we look at the map here, NYC was set up with some sweet track by the NYNH player. So NYC is a very reasonable decision. He floats it low. He's got 2 cash poor companies now. Needs to be a little bit careful as we approach permanent trains, but I don't think it's wrong to float another company here. Could definitely buy paying shares in other players' companies, but the revenue is not going to be that high, and you have to imagine that a lot of these players are going to be selling these shares in the next operating round once they bought in their privates, so you'd be losing a lot of value there. Regardless, some players going back for some of these cheap shares, and it looks like we're just going to see Devouring Tray floating his company, which he now has. He has exactly enough for one more share, actually. And can't buy anything because he sold one too many shares of the CNO. So that's kind of funny. That's a loss of efficiency there. Doesn't hurt to have a share in the market, of course, but I'm sure he'd rather have the share in his treasury. All right, so B&O's up, and because of the way operating order worked, and because of where the 3 train broke, we will see the PRR blocked at Lancaster, as we had kind of alluded to. In theory, you could talk about them trying to trash the B&O down, but the shares are so expensive. To get the B&O to operate after the PRR is really a tall order for any individual player. If you had collusion between players and they both bought and sold 2 shares, for instance, it's possible, but as it stands, just really not going to work. So Lancaster upgrades unfriendly. There's also an interesting opportunity here for these 2 players, the NYC and the B&O, to cooperate, to link up along the west coast of New York here and get some nice runs for both companies. We'll see if that comes to pass. NYNH, of course, might have something to say about that. But this will look really bad for the PRR. PRR is not going to have any runs for a while. B&O runs his train and buys a 3. He doesn't have any privates to buy in, but he doesn't want to fall back trainless on the 4 Rust event. NYNH, he upgrades Albany. NYC player is thanking him for that. Doesn't have to token there, but does need to be a little bit careful that he doesn't leave himself up for being tokened out at Albany. For instance, if the NYC player lays a straight here, and then the B&O lays a straight on running in Allentown, could see a token in Albany with a B&O. Unlikely, but possible. And that would be basically game over for the NYNH. So I think, if you're playing it safe, you probably do token Albany here. You're going to want that token eventually. Might as well just drop it. He does. And he also buys the 3 train. Not buying in his privates. We'll have another operating round to do so if he wants. Physics Squirrel. Blocking the CNO. CNO, as we noted, does have the Delaware and Hudson, so not the end of the world for him. Runs his single 2 train. I will comment again on the double 2 train buy, and he buys a 3. CNO doesn't have any track he can really lay. He's going to lay Scranton. Doesn't lay it towards Reading and Allentown. Wouldn't have been able to lay that track anyways because the B&O player has priority on him, but is probably looking to cooperate with his NYC train or NYC company. I don't know. I think it's unlikely that that's going to work out. You got the NYNH player that's going to be laying some blocking track probably. He is able to run 2 trains, but didn't have the operating order quite correct to run all 3 of them, which is a little bit loss of efficiency for him. Pays out 110, and we see the first operation of the NYC, who is not going to lay track to help his buddy on the CNO, is instead going to help lay track towards New York, which we will see comes back to bite him a little bit. He buys a 3, could buy a 4 here. It does. I think that's wise. He is very cash poor in both of his companies, but you don't want these other players running all these 2 trains. So B&O, single 2 train, gets to lay the Reading in Allentown, and is on top of the world. May want to pick up a 4. He does pretty good track once the NY tile upgrades, but he's going to leave himself train locked if he does. We'll see what he decides. He does buy the 4. And he's going to buy in his private. So for some reason, the B&O player did have a private I was neglecting. So he also, like the other players, was sitting on a private for 2 extra operating rounds, basically. But does buy in his privates eventually, and breaks the CPR suitcase, so won't be seeing that this game. NY&H, he basically screws over the C&O player instead of maximizing his revenue. Doesn't care about the extra $20 in New York, and realizes, with a single 3 train, that $80 cost is not worthwhile. So it's just going to hurt his opponent on the C&O. Very reasonable. Runs for 80, pays it out. He buys in his private, and PRR, continuing to lay track to nowhere, basically. Will eventually get a run into Baltimore, which is a nice revenue center, of course, but now only running 1 train, so a little bit too late for him. He's running for 30 still. That's a sad PRR. Buys in his private. Now he's a sad PRR, but a happy president. And C&O is probably regretting his decision not to help himself out with the NYC, and really is laying kind of meaningless track here. Runs for 80, pays it out. Really should probably start thinking about withholding on one of these companies, or else he's going to be struggling in the permanents. NYC, 2 trains. May see him upgrade New York. He has 2 trains that can tap it, so would be much better value for him. Also, NY&H, by neglecting to upgrade here, doesn't get this extra run, so the NYC gets a little bit of an extra value add by upgrading it after the NY&H has already operated. Very nice for him. Pays out for 190, and we are into stock round 5. And stock round 5 is where this game starts to go off the rails a little bit. You're looking at this, everybody has a lot of cash, everybody's looking to flow companies, but none of these companies are great. The B&M is pretty much dead in the water. There's tokens in Albany. This is not going to be upgraded this is not going to lead anywhere interesting. Erie has no friends. Token out at Albany. Could potentially get down to Pittsburgh, but it's going to take a long time to get there. And the CPR is already not suitcaseable. So you're looking at these 3 companies, and if you're one of these players, you can't be too excited about any of them. So I would think that you would be looking towards, high-paying shares. The NYC looking good, B&O looking good. But what ends up happening is that basically everything gets trashed, and then we see some new companies float. So I'm going to zip through this stock round because I believe it's actually pretty long. And we see the Erie is floated. And I think some other stuff gets trashed here. Physics Squirrel is doing some trashing, I believe. And still sitting on cash. It's a very long stock round. Still, the Erie is the only company to float. And now we see the CPR float. So when I see the CPR float, I'm now thinking, all right, Physics Squirrel thinks he's going to be able to bankrupt someone and win off the back of that. But you look at these net worths, and that is not a convincing or really safe strategy. Just because he's, $100 ahead of his next closest competitor, but he's going to have to sink a ton of money into the CPR. None of these shares are paying. He's going to lose $60 of value the first time this company operates just by falling back. Devouring Tray, his closest competitor, has 11 shares that are guaranteed to pay if he wants to, probably 14 shares that he can anticipate paying. So if Physics World tries to push for a bankruptcy, he could very well come in second place behind Devouring Tray. Now, I guess you got to look at it the other way. Who is going to bankrupt? So if Physics Squirrel thinks that Devouring Trey is the player most likely to bankrupt, then sure, I guess you could make an argument that maybe it's the move. But can you guarantee that? I don't think so. That's going to come down to operating order. All these companies are cash poor. Nobody has any permanent trains. So I think this is probably what Physics Squirrel is thinking, is that he's going to push for a bankruptcy win here. But I am skeptical. Regardless, he's got the money to float the CPR, and we will be seeing that here. So we have two new floats. Poor Erie has been trashed quite heavily, and we are into operating round 5. So we have 2 4 trains facing. Unfortunate for Physics Squirrel that the CPR is operating before the Erie, which has been trashed. Otherwise, he could have potentially bought a 4 and a 5, but he's not going to be in a position to do that. So we will kind of zip through this operating round. We are anticipating some 5 trains coming out here and in the next operating round. Physics Squirrel knows that he can't suitcase this company, so bites the bullet, lays the $80 track, and is going to be buying a 4. The B&O player still doesn't have brown track, but could upgrade his home. He does, so gets a little bit of extra money there, $220. And I think all these players got to start thinking about where their permanent trains are going to be coming from. The Erie is in a position to buy the 4, and I believe he has money for the 5 as well. He does, definitely does. So all these players got to be looking towards the next operating round. B&O is going to be the first to operate if he pays here. And can they snag the second and third 5 trains? So probably pays here and then withholds in the next set just to make sure he operates ahead of the CPR, would be my guess. He does pay, and NY and H, has a decision, owns 90% of the, well, I guess really doesn't have a decision, owns 90% of the revenue, should just pay here to operate earlier in the next operating round. Laying track for his friend in the Erie, but needs to be careful. There's a little bit of a standoff here, right? If you put yourself 1 track lay away from Rochester, NYC is going to sneak in there and drop that token that you were hoping to get in the Erie. Not the end of the world if Rochester's token in this game, because Scranton has been laid, so Erie can make a little line down to Scranton and hope to sneak into New York that way, but still not entirely safe track lay. He is paying PRR, very cash poor, heading up towards Chicago. There is a valid upgrade that will get him in there. Runs for 80, pays it. Nobody's withholding yet. Nobody's scared about this train rush. C&O, for some reason, lays Toledo. This player, Devouring Trey, we've been talking about how his companies are cash poor the entire game, and he throws away $80 on Toledo. Not clear what the rationale is there. He owns 80% of the revenue, probably should pay. He does. NYC. He scoots over to Rochester, and he does token it. So, this player has wasted $120 as we've been watching, facing permanent trains with no cash in his companies and no permanent trains. I am nervous for Devouring Trey here. We are to the man of the hour, Erie, and Erie has the option of buying a 4 and a 5 here, which he immediately does, and we are into the B&O. Should see a withhold. Oh, actually, this caught me off guard, and I think it may have caught the B&O player too. He's train locked because the 5 train came out, so even a withhold here is not going to get him a permanent train. He does have the ability now to upgrade New York, but he may want to look towards Philadelphia instead, because the PRR player is finally going to be able to get into Lancaster in this set of operating rounds. So let's see. He does lay it. He blocks himself, which is interesting. I see this a lot in this league, the interesting lays of Philadelphia and Trenton. So he's not going to be running into New York through Lancaster. He's going to instead, I guess, set up a run through Baltimore. Okay. So does he drop a token here? He does not. So if the PRR player is playing aggressively, could look to drop a token in Philadelphia to kill the B&O runs. We'll see. He runs for 260, pays it out. NY&H, not train locked, but I don't think his revenue is going to be high enough to secure a permanent train here. He is paying for 120, PRR, upgrades Lancaster, and tokens it. So going to be playing friendly, at least for now, with the B&O. Pays for 130. CPR should be snagging that last 5 train here. Or actually, is it the second 5 train? It is, yes. So good news for Physics Squirrel. He is able to buy that. CNO, he gets into New York as expected. I think this is the death knell for B&M. No reason really to float that company. And pays out 110. Devouring Trey, he's not going to be buying any 5 trains because he has not been withholding and just wasting money. Erie, he is going to. Did MP Coin shuffle trains? He must have, because he had bought a 5 train earlier. So that will be the last 5 train. MP Coin is going to secure both 5 trains. Usually a pretty good way to win a game is having both 5 trains, and he has secured that. Looking at the net worth here, he is pretty far behind in net worth, but share count doing okay. And again, having 2 permanent trains cannot be understated. So a little bit of a wonky last stock round. And we are now off to the races. We'll see who's able to trigger this next rusting event. I don't think that if Physics Squirrel was pushing for bankruptcy, it went exactly the way he was planning, but the game is still kind of young here. And in stock round 6, we see Devouring Trey actually goes back and floats the B&M. So the B&M is kind of a dead letter, right? It has no track potential. Doesn't matter what trains it gets because it's not going to be running them for anything worthwhile. He does get a little bit of a bonus in terms of his net worth here, or functional net worth, right? Because a 6 train is 630, so the B&M is going to be able to buy it and then contribute 370 to his other companies. But looking at his other company's treasuries, he's still in a world of hurt. If he brings out the 6, he's going to need the second 6, which he's not going to be able to really afford. And then he's now opened up D trains, which he also cannot afford. So Devouring Trey, while he is leading, this is kind of a misleading lead. That was too many leads in a row. We will go through the rest of the operating or stock round. Basically, players are just buying paying shares other than Devouring Trey. Physics Squirrel is reallocating some cash here, but everybody else is pretty much just buying paying shares. And we have not seen the B&M float yet, so Devouring Trey is taking a detour to trash some stuff. He has sold out of the CNO and now floated the B&M. CNO is vulnerable, not very attractive, with pretty poor track and only a 3 train. So we'll see if anybody wants to sacrifice priority here. Looks like Devouring Trey is reallocating his cash and everybody else is passing. So Devouring Trey is going to be going last in priority. And DAK has first choice of action in the next stock round. And we will note that Devouring has 3 companies and is max invested in B&O, which has got pretty good track and good long-term potential. So potentially in a good position if he can survive this train rush without having to sell too many shares. DAK though has different thoughts, and he is actually going to withhold here, which is real bad news for Devouring because he is facing down having to buy 3 permanent trains in this set of operating rounds. So he would really have liked to get half of this revenue into his company or into his presidency, but does not. NYNH has a permanent train, is going to be living large here with 2 trains. PRR, also without a permanent train, gets the upgrade we talked about. So now that the Lancaster track has opened up, does have a pretty decent run from Baltimore through Lancaster into Chicago with the appropriate trains. And it's looking pretty likely that he's going to be forced to buy a D train. Pays it out. CPR heading over to the double O's. Does have some money in this company for his eventual permanent train in the PRR. B&M first operation is going to have to buy a 6 here and is going to shuffle trains to get the money out of the B&M and then buy these 6. So we'll have to go into company coffers, presidency coffers, to buy the 6 in the CNO and also loses a run because he shuffled trains, but it kind of had to do that or else he was going to be in for a world of hurt. He actually has to sell a share to afford this train, so already kind of bad news here, but he does have 2 of his 3 required permanent trains now. The problem he's going to run into is that he really doesn't have great runs. So you know, the NYC has some potential here, but you got to watch out for this token in Scranton or even in New York from the Erie player, which you have to assume is coming down the pike, and that's going to be really painful. Upgrades Dunkirk, and places a token in Scranton. So he was worried about that. His runs are now pretty secure, but needs to get the right train to take advantage of it. Erie didn't have money for the token anyways, and is looking to create this double O loop. And we're into the operation of the NYNH. NYNH is looking to bypass Rochester. Going to be a tall order for that actually to come to pass. Pays out, and now we're to the B&O. B&O is just a hair away from being able to withhold for the D-Train upgrade, which would be really bad news for Devouring Trey. His company, the B&M, is operating first, so he can't even really get a run out of any of his companies if he has to shuffle trains, really, if the 4 trains rust. But the 4 trains don't rust, so he's given a little breath of life here. B&O actually secures the token in the Philadelphia track, so he's able to secure his runs, at least until Erie gets down here, and is going to withhold again, but is unfortunately unable to bring out the D. PRR running a 5 train, which he shuffled out of the CPR, and is looking, it looks like, completing a big loop around the entire map so that the CPR actually has some decent runs in the late game. Runs for 230, pays it out. CPR looking to get into the double O's here. Does have a little bit of cash for when the D train comes out, but is also in for a little bit of a painful time like Devouring Trey. B&M trainless is just going to shuffle trains. C&O is, I suppose, looking to get into the double O's here. Not entirely sure. Runs a 6 train for a piddling 170, pays it out. Still not doing any withholding for his D train. NYC runs for 240, a little bit better than the C&O, and pays that out. Erie, last company to operate here, links up with the double O, but still lacks cash for the token or the upgrade. So I think that the NYC is out of tokens, has one more, needs to secure this token here as soon as possible. He's withholding and will have the token and the upgrade in the next operating round. Operating round 6.3. NYNH, not the most interesting company right now. PRR also kind of just making lazy progress over to the CPR. CPR, last run of this 4 train, does get the upgrade. Interesting that he decides to do the upgrade. I suppose he's going to snag that token. Actually doesn't. So I think if you're going to pay the $80 for the upgrade, you probably should snag the token while you're doing it. Otherwise, you just spend money that you're going to need for a permanent train. But is still paying out. B&O is upgrading his home and is able to run for basically exactly enough to get the D train upgrade. Actually, I guess he was $100 over. All right. D train has come out, but it is, for our viewers' sake, a little bit too late to end the game. So we do have this game go late. And we see some blocking here for the NYNH. And Devouring Trey now has to figure out a way to afford a train. He has 3 companies, so he can just shuffle one of these trains, and he has the liquidity here. So we will not be seeing a bankruptcy, but he has to decide, does he, go into the stock round with 0 money, sell shares to buy a train here, or does he shuffle trains to get the D train in a more attractive company? And I think it's the right call to not deplete all your cash into the stock round. But I think it's probably the wrong call to put the D train into the C&O. So even though the C&O has a little bit more money, if you're going to shuffle trains, you might as well kind of just commit and get the D train in the NYC, which I think is going to have better track based on the way things are looking here. Erie is able to secure a token in the double O, so we'll have a pretty secure run here, but has left this open, and let's not forget the NYC token is available. So pays it out, and we are into stock round 7. So basically, this game, as we have been alluding to, goes late, and there is some shenanigans that happens here, but I will start moving a little bit more quickly. Stock round 7, people basically just buy paying shares, so we're going to skip that, and we will just note that Devouring Trey ends up with priority, and there are people invested in his company, Physics Squirrel specifically, that are vulnerable to a dump. So both of these players are kind of jockeying for lead in net worth, but they both need a permanent train. So really, MP Coin is in the lead here, and solidly because he's got two permanent trains. And we basically are going to see Devouring Tray and Physics Squirrel kind of fight it out here, and crabs in the bucket style, MP Coin is going to benefit. So NYNH is operating. This company really has very little to say in the game anymore. PRR continuing to work on connecting up with the CPR is going to pay out. NYC, he has a train, at least in this company, and doesn't have money for the token, but is still able to get a pretty decent run with a 6 for now. Pays it out. B&O, he's running a D train, so he might also be interested in this long connection across the map, but unfortunately for him, he doesn't have any tokens to defend it. So he's going to just upgrade to Lido for a little more money. Pays for 420. This is really good news for Devouring Tray, who's living off the B&O income as he shuffles trains. C&O is going to token in Dunkirk. This kills the Erie's runs. And this is interesting, right? Because the player with no permanent trains is going to have to go out of pocket is dropping tokens. So now he has even less money. And he does something interesting here. He has bought the train out of the C&O with the NYC. And now he's going to go into his company, his personal cash to buy it back from the NYC. So he has depleted his money from his personal treasury to contribute it to a D train in another company, which is unusual. Usually, if you're going to go into your presidency, you're going to just outright buy the permanent train. But I think in retrospect, and I didn't see this happening at the time, I think in retrospect, he's doing this intentionally to set up for a dump in the operating round. So there's a 3-company dump that we will see. And I think that he is setting up for that now. So some kind of next level plays, it's not really very effective, as you will see, but I love where the thought process is. CPR doesn't care too much about the double O's anymore and is going to be linking up with the PRR. He does just bite the bullet and buys the D train. So two opposite strategies here. Physics Squirrel is just recognizing that he needs the D train and he buys it. Devouring Tray is going to do everything he can to kick the can down the road. Erie is looking to get in on this action of the loop here. But his run has been cut, so pretty poor revenue. The B&M is again going to shuffle trains, and we are into the next operating set. We're going to skip through the NYNH. PRR has his train, has completed the link, doesn't have cash for a token, may see some kind of shenanigans there to get that, to shut down other players' runs. But the B&O is happy to see this because he's got a pretty monstrous run now, 490. Which again is good news for DAC, but good news for Devouring Tray as well. Devouring Tray, pretty close to D-Train money, but is actually spending yet more money. And again, I think this all goes back to him trying to deplete cash to allow him to sell shares in the B&M to dump the B&M here. But it's hard to explain these actions otherwise. So he withholds and doesn't actually do anything with the money. And again, he's trying to keep money out of his personal coffers so that he can sell shares to dump a train or dump a company. CPR, just laying kind of random track here. He is withholding, and I think this is for token money because he needs to defend this run that he's built for both of his companies for the late game. C&O. So now we finally see it. This is Devouring Tray's master plan. He sells shares, dumps the B&M, but wait, if we look at the B&M, it has a 6 train. So he went through all these contortions to, dump this company in the OR, which is super slick. I love it. But then he forgot to take the train out. So he just gave Physics Squirrel a big gift. Physics Squirrel, of course, already had to buy a D train, so it's not the end of the world, really. But you're giving him share density, yellow shares, a new presidency. Funny. I saw this and I was kind of confused. So we see a dump of a permanent train, not ideal, and I think the rest of this stock round is unexciting. We just need to make sure that Physics Squirrel doesn't somehow end up in brown, where Devouring Tray could steal the company back, but he is really not in any danger of that. So he's going to just run for $70 and wave goodbye to the former president. He actually does withhold, but still not going to be in danger of getting the company stolen from him. The rest of the operating round, I think we can basically just skip. Devouring Trey is going to have to finally buy a permanent train. He somehow has $1,400 in this company because of his shenanigans, basically siphoning money from his net worth into the company. So should have no trouble doing that. And we are into stock round 8. At this point, the game is, going to go for another 2 operating rounds, we can assume. MP Coin and DAC are kind of starting to run away with it. Physics Squirrel does have 3 companies, but the runs are not that great. And when you're $1,600 behind the other players, you can pretty safely assume you're not going to be winning. Devouring Trey is in a pretty miserable position. He's got decent runs in the New York, but again, he's not going to be running for enough to make up a $2,000 deficit here. He's also already behind in shares, so just really not anything going to be going on here for either of those players. So we will skip this stock round. We're going to skip this set of operating rounds, and I'll just point out that Physics Squirrel is really doubling down on a late game strategy. He's got 2 trains in the PRR, went back and bought another D train. He's running for great revenue, but he doesn't have enough shares to overcome the other players. He's still $1,600 behind MP Coin, and looking at the bank here, we're going to see the bank break in the next set of operating rounds. So we'll just skip to the end of the game, and after a pretty funny game, MP Coin narrowly wins over DAK. We didn't talk much about DAK, but he was basically just running the B&O pretty well. Did eventually get tokened out at Pittsburgh and have his runs cut since Physics Squirrel was playing for the late game and withholding and doing all this stuff. Devouring Trey and Physics Squirrel kind of got into a fist fight in the mid of the game and killed each other, and then MP Coin was able to win. So was a pretty interesting game, some pretty big errors from some of the players, but enjoyable to watch. And that will bring us to Game B. Game B and Game C were a little bit less, exciting to watch. We will try to move through them a little bit quicker, and we are going to be aided in that fact that a lot of the shenanigans that happen in these games are the same. So I think that this tournament and these players have really kind of developed a meta that they tend to play very similarly. So we'll make some comments about things in this game that we will hopefully be able to breeze over in Game C. The auction in this game is reasonable. The B&O ends up floating for 90, which when I see that always makes me think that the B&O player is hoping to float his own company. And we will see that the C and A player is given the opportunity to float their own company in operating or stock round 1 here. The rest of the stock round is still a little bit interesting because after commenting that we saw the B&O float and give him the opportunity to float his own company, we actually see them go back and start the NY&H, and starting it at a par that is not something that they're going to be able to afford anytime soon. So this is pretty interesting, right? You've neutered your value from your private. Your shares are worth less than they otherwise would be, and you're not even going to float it. This is terrible because if you don't get any help here, you can't float this company until I think I looked at it and it was at least stock round 3. So you've really just neutered your start of the game here. The rest of the stock round goes pretty standard, so we will skip through this. One other thing I neglected to comment on is that if we look at this, Cotton Grass has floated the NYC. That's a little bit dangerous because the NY&H can cut you off at the knees if they float in the same operating round as you. We did see the NY&H start, but we didn't see it float because of this shenanigans with River Fiend. So just a comment there. Sorry, I missed one key thing in the stock round. Cotton Grass did exchange the M&H for a high par of the NYC. That's actually pretty important and generally a bad idea. So I glossed over that, but that is an important thing to comment on. Regardless, NYC is operating and buys two trains, is only ever going to be able to run one two train in yellow, at least until they get up to Rochester, which is never going to happen. So that's questionable. It makes it very easy for the other players to buy in their privates potentially. So probably should not be doing that. PRR heads east, like to see that, buys a single two train. CNO heads towards Chicago Standard, buys a single two train. Could see this player push into the threes, but since there was only three companies that floated, it would be pretty expensive. And she has, she has pretty good privates, so could be motivated to do that, but it would be pretty expensive, kind of kill the CNO. So we go into stock round two. There is a little bit of a stall in this game, so we're going to skip stock round two. Not a whole lot interesting there. We will also skip OR2 since it's all just the standard track, and we are in stock round three, where we finally see River Fiend be able to float their company. So yeah, not a fan of this start for this player, but we'll see how the rest of the game works out for them. HJM Quilter's up and buys an NYC. Really not the best revenue, and also an expensive share. So I guess didn't have too many other options to invest cash. Yeah, reasonable, but not the end of the world. Could have just sat and hoped to go higher in priority, actually. Yeah, okay, I take it back. I don't like that play. Should have just kept priority here. But we are into operating round three, and we will finally hopefully see the three trains break. NYC doesn't have any track delay other than Rochester, so is upgrading that. NYNH buys into the threes, and this is the B&O player, so should not really have very lucrative privates. Yeah, just the Schuylkill, which is kind of the player least incentivized to buy into the threes, but goes ahead and does it. Buys the private, PRR, heads to Pittsburgh, and that's interesting, right? Is losing tempo, could upgrade Lancaster and get a guaranteed access into Reading and Allentown, or could buy in the CNA and get a better run for his company by laying track into Philadelphia and running both two trains. Instead is going to head west, which really doesn't accomplish anything for reasons unknown. Runs for 60, pays it out, buys his private, buys the three, and CNO buys in the blocker in Burlington, buys in her D&H, and then immediately teleports to Scranton. When I first saw this, I was like, oh boy, we're seeing this a lot, and spoiler alert, we're going to see some more of it. And I was a little bit critical of this at first because I wasn't realizing that the Lancaster or the PRR player hadn't upgraded Lancaster. But because they haven't upgraded Lancaster, this is really pretty strong. It is $120 for a $40 token, which is not great, but she's got guaranteed access into Reading and Allentown now, which is awesome. So she's going to be able to decide if she wants to run into Philadelphia, if she wants to run into New York North, or New York South, presumably heading to New York South, but really just pretty nice and totally preventable if the Lancaster PRR player had played less lazily. Maybe that was harsh. I shouldn't use that. Regardless, buys a three, and we are into operating round three. Everybody's pretty flush with cash, or at least HJM Quilter and D Young are, so should be seeing some new floats here. And I will go back and just comment that the reason Cottongrass has no money is because she chose to exchange the M&H for the NYC share. So she's got $100 of net worth in the NYC and pretty poor revenue, rather than $220 of president cash in this stock round. So that is why you don't do that. D Young has the opportunity to take the B&O here. Probably should do that, but I believe we see them do something else. Yeah, so instead of taking a very rich B&O with decent map position, goes in for the B&M. B&M is kind of a dead letter, right? Albany's tokened, NYAC or NYNH is going to be tokening there. CNO is already kind of scrambled over to the east side of the map. B&M has no prospects. So this is kind of a confusing float here, particularly when the B&O is indefensible. We will see this rectified later in the stock round. D Young has to sell shares to float. We're seeing that. Congrass, as commented on, has no money. Sells an NYC. This is that M&H share, now sold for an NY&H share. Fine. River Fiend buying a PRR that was sold down. And HDM Quilter says, oh my God, I can't believe my luck. The B&O is available and is going to steal that presidency. So good pickup for her and something that should never have been allowed. Going to see her continuing to pressure the B&O presidency. Snags that with no trouble. D Young is floating. HDM Quilter will have to sell a share here. Sells one of her own CNOs. That's fine. And the B&O has now floated. So 2 new companies float here in stock round 4, and we are going to be off to the races. NYC is operating first, does need to pick up a 3 train at least, or should be expecting to fall back trainless in the next operating round of this set. Tokens Rochester, don't know that you really need to there. Could save a cheap token for Scranton, or upgrade Albany and hope to get down into Lancaster. Don't imagine that you care too much if the NY&H, were to steal that token in Rochester, which is highly unlikely to happen. So runs for 70 and buys the 3. We are getting close to the 4 trains. B&O is first to operate of the new companies. Heads over to Atlantic City to get into Philadelphia. I like that. Can't guarantee that Lancaster would upgrade friendly, and this will get you guaranteed access into Philadelphia next operating round. Buys the 4. All the trains are rusting now, but everybody covered themselves. Lancaster probably kicking themselves that they didn't upgrade Lancaster last time, because now they're going to lose out on Reading and Allentown. But so they are going to neglect to upgrade Philadelphia and Trenton again, which is going to allow Baltimore B&O player to get that upgrade and the CNO to get the Reading and Allentown. So this decision to lay Pittsburgh really set them behind in track tempo, just really, really going to hurt them throughout this game. CNO lays Reading and Allentown. I like the way HDM Quilter's been running this. That's fine. My only nitpick here is that I probably would have picked a different double dit for Reading and Allentown. Don't want to leave the north-south connection through here open if you can avoid it. So there should have been a double gentle track that could have been laid instead. This one that would have prevented that. But I will not quibble too much in the interest of time. B&M, dead company, is going to lay $120 worth of track and buy a 4 train, so now it doesn't have permanent train money and really just is not going to go anywhere. NY&H upgrades Albany, should snag that token, does. Really needed to do that. You are tempted to be greedy and try and get down in Lancaster sometimes, but that is a recipe for disaster because you're going to have your run cut. No guarantee you can upgrade this with a sharp. Yeah, not good. So tokening in Albany is basically always the move. Runs for 80 and withholds it. I guess afraid for permanent trains, unclear otherwise. NYC, 2 trains. You're just going to be able to get down into Lancaster, which is really good for the NYC. So people should be looking to invest in Cottongrass's company. You don't have to be the president to reap the rewards of a company with good track. Does snag that. A little bit unfortunate for the B&O potentially, but they have access through Philadelphia and Trenton, so really not too worried about it. Runs for 150, pays it out. B&O gets the Philadelphia token, track. But again, for the second time this week, we see someone block themselves from getting into New York. Yeah, sure, you deny the revenue in the short term from the Lancaster companies, but is that worth it to basically, deny yourself any runs through Philadelphia into New York? I don't know. So tokens even. Boy. Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to criticize that. PRR lays the sharp, so is going to be getting some access into New York guaranteed. CNO is laying track out in the west. I don't know. I think you upgrade New York here. Better revenue. I don't hate this. I think it's okay, actually. You got a lot of companies that are going to benefit from the New York upgrade. Let one of them lay that track. I agree. Runs for 80, pays it out. B&M, who cares? Lays another $120 track, doing nothing interesting. NY&H is going to be looking towards Scranton potentially to create a loop and get into New York south, but this is never going to be a run that they can defend. Pays it out, and we are into stock round 5. Stock round 5, there's some fighting here. We're going to see the NYC sold down, or at least eventually it gets trashed down, which is kind of crazy because it's got a fair amount of money towards a permanent train, and it also has great midterm revenue and great late game potential. So really, if you're buying these shares, I'm thinking you want to hold them for the rest of the game. But it does get trashed, and we see River Fiend make a play at some point for the B&O. But HDM Quilter is only 1 share away, so really not in any danger. And eventually, after trashing everyone, River Fiend is going to float the Erie. So I'm just moving quickly here. We see a lot of share trashing going on, a lot of people selling out of the NYC, which is kind of inexcusable. And we do see the B&M getting trashed down to orange. These shares are cheap, reasonable to pick them up if you have extra cash, but this company is garbage tier, so don't want to waste cert limit if you don't have to. We do finally see the Erie float. It's a pretty low float, but it will potentially push into poison 4 territory, so we could see people opening up some permanent trains here. Realistically speaking, though, nobody has money to do that, so we're going to have to wait for the CPR. CPR has not been laid, the blocker, so we could see that suitcase. Rest of the stock round is just River Fiend floating the Erie, and we are into the operating rounds. HDM Quilter has priority, so she has the ability to set up a suitcase in the CPR and priority to make it happen, which, spoiler alert, we're going to see. The rest of this operating round, I believe we just see a stall, so I think we can just basically skip the operating round. We do see a CNO token on New York. I think this token is a mistake. Should be tokened in Philadelphia. This token really gets you nothing that the Philadelphia token doesn't, and you already have tokened with your other company, the B&O. So yeah, would like to see the token in Philadelphia instead. And I think the rest of this operating round is unremarkable. We're into the stock round, HDM Quilter with priority, and with the CSTL is going to eventually be floating the CPR, but I think that we may not see that just yet. Yeah, that is next stock round. So this stock round, not a whole lot is happening. And I believe this operating round again is just stalled on the poison 4. So we're going to move ahead here. Just trying to keep things moving. Cotton Grass has priority, but HDM Quilter still has money for floating the CPR and still controls that suitcase ability. So we don't see anybody steal the CPR from her, and she does, I believe, go floated here, or at least in this stock round. There we go. So that's the interesting thing that happens in this stock round. We'll skip the rest of it. And now with the CPR floated, we can look at company cash and see that there is now enough cash to push through the 4s into the 5s. And looking at operating order, it looks like she has actually arranged it that she should be able to buy a 4 and a 5 and then a 5 in the B&O. So off to a really good start in the permanent train rush for HDM Quilter. Has pretty good runs for both of her companies. Needs to get this track upgraded so that the CNO is not blocked by Dunkirk anymore, but otherwise is off to a good start here. So let's see how the 5 trains come out. This track was laid so that hopefully the suitcase won't be broken. The suitcase is a little bit hard to break in this scenario just because the green track has been laid in such a way that there aren't, real convenient upgrades to get into Montreal. Not impossible, but you would have liked, if you're one of the players, to have a gentle laying up to one of these tiles here rather than all these green tracks. So buys the 4, buys the 5. And Erie is going to be able to withhold for a 5. And then we do see HDM Quilter secure the last 5. and also kill the Lancaster track. So in a pretty commanding position here. NYNH with a withhold probably can snag a 6. Um, let's see, is going to be just, yeah, actually just over. So we see a pretty explosive train rush here. And the B&M player who's got 80% of these shares is unfortunately not able to get a single run at 80% and is going to have to, I believe, sell some shares. Yeah, selling B&O. Selling a lot for the last 6. This leaves the NYC player to buy a D train. So this was a very explosive train rush. The 5s came out and then both 6 went, and now both companies are going to be forced to buy Ds here, all in quick succession. So this is going to force everybody to sell a bunch of shares, really shake up the game state. And D train has come out. The PRR now has to buy a D train. Could shuffle, but actually sells down a bunch of the B&M. B&M is already in brown, so whoever has priority is going to be able to snag a bunch of cheap brown shares. D Young can, but is going to struggle to have cash to do it. So that was a crucial moment in the game, that train rush there, and it really shook things up. Cottongrass and D Young are functionally eliminated from this game. NYC does have a decent run potential with the D train, but so far behind, so few shares, not going to be possible to come back. HDM Quilter has the suitcase and the CPR and has $500 towards the D train, so even if that's broken, not going to be a game ender for her. Fervor Fiend, not a terrible position, permanent trains, decent amount of shares, but already $700 behind HDM Quilter and just going to fall kind of gradually behind here. So we will skip the rest of this operating round. HDM Quilter has not bought a D train yet. Spoiler alert, the CPR suitcase is broken in this game, but she's so far ahead, we can just skip to the end and see that she takes it in fairly convincing fashion, was never really in danger after that explosive train rush. So navigated that well, liked the CNO teleport. Do think this is only possible in this game because of the PRR's decision not to upgrade Lancaster, but we've talked about that already. So yeah, pretty convincing win from HDM Quilter. Nice work. We will jump into Game C. At this Game C with a new player, Too Many Revenants, and has a lot of similarities in terms of shenanigans in with Game B. So hopefully we'll be able to move through this a little bit quicker. This auction is potentially notable in the sense that there's a pretty early pull. JTT is given priority, and Too Many Revenants is given the opportunity to potentially float here with $335. So if you're going to bid up the CNA, you probably want to make sure they don't have $335 because what happens here is we see another Mohawk and Hudson exchange, which is crazy to me. And then Too Many Revenants is exactly with enough money to take the PRR. So the auction wasn't all that interesting, but the first actions in the stock round are crazy. So already off to a wild start in this game. And I will also point out while we're talking about the MNH, since we skipped it in the last game, this player has also floated this company too high, so is going to be sitting with zero income until someone basically takes mercy on him. This is a game-ending move. If you want to lose the game in your first move, this is it. If we are taking the Splotter philosophy of 18XX. Heart of Dior. She is going to take the CNO, always good company, floats it pretty high, just because I guess she realizes JTT is dead. And then Crewmeister is going to invest in the PRR. Rest of the stock round, probably not all that exciting. Crewmeister is investing quite heavily in the PRR players' company. This is the company operating last. We've talked about this ad nauseum, but this is the highest likelihood company to be dumped. But with a 2-company float, how worried are you really about that? So everybody has floated. Nobody has taken mercy on the NYC. And really, I think you got to teach players a lesson in that situation. Please don't float their company for them. We are into stock or operating round 1. CNO heads pretty standard, buys a single 2 train. PRR also standard track. We are into stock round 2. Crewmeister now in a position where they're going to be kind of forced to sell the PRR and is going to go back and just start floating his own B&O. This is not really the end of the world for the Too Many Revenants player. I mean, he's got a bunch of yellow shares now, a bunch of shares in the market. Happy to have it, I'm sure. Nobody has cash for anything except for Crewmeister. It's a quick stock round, and we are into operating round 3. B&O is going to be buying a train here, heads south. Never a fan of that. Buys a 2 train, buys two trains. So it's going to make it pretty easy for the other players to buy in their privates. And then we see CNO buys a 2nd train, which is also strange. PRR, though, kind of drops the ball here, in my opinion, and has a very easy access to buy in his privates, just a 2 and a 3, but is going to token Lancaster. There's no pressure to do that. Pays out 30 instead of withholding, and then buys in 2 trains, or sorry, 2 3 trains instead of buying in his CNA. So buys in the cheap private, fine, but why not just withhold, save the token? You're going to have another, what, $70, and then not buy this 3 train. That's going to put you at $250 and almost $300 just buying the CNA, and then you're going to run away with the game. But it's going to buy 4 trains here. Never going to have track to run all those 4 trains, and neglect to buy in the CNA. So not a fan of that. Should have a lot more money in his disposal right now. Buys the CNO, and Crewmeister is going to sell 1 share of his company. It's an expensive share. Should be able to pick up some cheap PRR shares. No reason not to. JTT still unable to float the NYC, has managed to get a CNO share somehow, so we'll have some revenue to eventually float this company, but boy, that is a painful start. B&O being bought, last share for Heart of Dior, and looks like Crewmeister is going to end up with priority. A few notable things in this operating round. CNO will eventually token over to Scranton. We'll see that in a moment. Buying in their privates in OR 3.1, should have done that in 2.2. Missing that opportunity, probably should do it in 3.2. So a little bit of inefficiency there from Heart of Dior, but does get the privates bought in now. B&O is doubling down on the Southern strategy. Does token there even, which is kind of a wasted token for the rest of the game. And then we see him buy a 3 train, so secure against the 4s. The PRR player is blocked at Philadelphia because the CNA has not been bought in, so has 4 trains, but can only run 2 of them, and it's pretty poor revenue. Still not withholding to buy in the CNA. Really should be withholding, and really should not have bought that 3 train. Withholding gets you 100% of the revenue since the CNA is so expensive, gets you yellow shares, just really strictly better than paying out here. And also is going to let you run for better money once the CNA is bought in, you can lay Philadelphia. So big missed opportunity from the PRR player. We do see the Scranton teleport here. Really not under any pressure to get to the east. So not a fan of this teleport. I did like the teleport last game, less of a fan in this game. Regardless, running 2 trains and pays it for 110. Needs to get a 3 train here or is going to fall back trainless. Does secure that. Good move. B&O should have pretty good revenue now that he has 3 trains and is able to double tap Baltimore. Pays for 190. PRR still a little bit behind the times here, just running 2 trains and paying it out. Really should be withholding here. I'm going to keep criticizing this. Stock round 4. So the big elephant in the room, stock round 4, is that we're going to finally see JTT finally manage to join the game. It's been a 3-player game up to this point. So he sells out and floats the NYC. Great for him. And then the other thing is that Too Many Revenants is going to sell out of the PRR to float a company, but for reasons kind of unknown, floats the CPR. So we've seen this last week. I think we've commented on this, but the CPR is not a good company. You should not be prioritizing this company over, good companies like the NYNH, which is very available and also has a golden opportunity to screw over the NYC. So poor JTT, he's been sitting on this company for 4 stock rounds or whatever, salivating at the idea of finally joining the game. How funny it would be if Too Many Revenants floats the NYNH, lays a gentle turn here, and just kills the NYC before it even operates. But we won't be seeing that because we're going to see a CPR float. This is not a safe suitcase, just really not a good decision. Heart of Dior is selling, also has money for a float, and takes the Erie. Again, I mean, Erie's fine, I guess, but the NYNH, come on. Crewmeister, just buying, paying shares. JTT, really just excited to be running the NYC, and then we'll see these other 2 players float their companies. So we are going to be into OR4 here. We have the NYC's first operation, snags the last 3. Does not buy a 4 though, so the B&O player gets to run his 2 trains and basically, screw everybody else over by buying the last 4. So the 2 trains have rusted. He also blocked the CNO. So even though the Lancaster tile was kind of behind the times, B&O is able to sneak in there and block the CNO. This is the downside of this teleport. This token is kind of worthless at this point. B&O is doing pretty well here. CPR, not a fan of this whole situation. He is going to shuffle trains into the PRR, reasonable, but this suitcase is not secure in the slightest. Erie, going to buy a train out of the CNO, so both players are kind of shuffling trains to get money into their chosen companies, but this does leave CNO to fall back trainless, which is never ideal, especially when you have 80% of the revenue. And she is going to get into Lancaster 1 operating round too late. Buys a 4, and the PRR is up with a ton of cash. Lays the blocker on Burlington, so I think that I was misunderstanding who owned the CSTL. He is able to secure a suitcase here, at least for now. So a little bit less bad, but still bad. Upgrades Pittsburgh and running for 90. Buys a train from the CPR instead of pushing trains. Not entirely clear what's going on there. The rest of this operating round is not interesting. I will comment that the Erie didn't lay any tracks, so maybe also attempting a suitcase, but just kind of behind in tempo. We will just look back and not laying any track, so that is interesting. 2 companies being suitcased, neither of them very secure. Heart of Dior doesn't have a whole lot of cash, was shuffling trains, only got 1 payout in the CNO, and Erie is being suitcased. It did leave a train in the Erie, even though didn't give it any runs. So not much for her to do in this stock round. She is going to sell out, commit to the suitcase, but again, not secure. Buys a B&O. Only thing interesting here is that we have some players suitcasing, so Revenant is going to finally float the NYNH and push trains, or at least try and push trains, and we will see if anybody is able to go bankrupt, because I think that's his strategy here. We are into the operating round, and we are anticipating a monstrous train rush here with 2 suitcase companies and a new float. So just looking at the train roster, we have 1 train before the Poison 4, which I guess makes the train before the Poison train the Poison train. And we will see how that develops. B&O, upgrading Washington, withholding 260, and not buying a train. NYNH, newly floated company, shuffling trains out of the PRR. Too much train shuffling in this game, just too many lost runs. CNO buys a 4 train facing a train rush. So, you've got the NYNH player buying trains out of the PRR, telegraphing potentially that he wants to push into the 5s, and the CNO player with unsecure suitcase is buying non-permanent trains. That is risky and probably the reason the game ends the way it does. PRR now happy to push into fives, I'm sure. And we see that. CPR being suitcased, Erie being suitcased, but look at this. It's days are numbered. NYC happy to pick up a 5 train, I'm sure. Tokens in New York to prevent the C&O player from grabbing that. B&O is linking up, so now has runs into New York North and South. This is a little bit unusual track confirmation. Don't usually see this track laid, but good news for the B&O in the short term. He is withholding and train locked, so has secured himself a permanent train. However, if you're looking at the game state, you got to be a little bit nervous here that you're going to see a bankruptcy. So with a withhold here of 290 would be, contesting for first with too many revenants. Withholding is pretty painful from that perspective. I understand why you're doing it, but may not work out for you. NYNH running for 130 pays it. C&O, two 4 trains is going to have decent revenue here, but is in danger. PRR making a beeline for the Erie. Runs 2 trains, pays it out. CPR still suitcased. Erie in danger. Heart of Dior with priority is going to buy NYNH. And this player needs to see the writing on the wall here that their suitcase is dead. So they need to buy shares that are, 1, going to get them a little bit of extra cash in the operating round or stock round, and 2, guaranteed to operate early before she needs money for this permanent train. She needs to be very careful in how she invests at this point. Erie is going to get sold down here, and it actually gets stolen, but then I believe it's dumped back. So net change in this stock round is that the suitcase remains with Heart of Dior. I think Crewmeister thought he was going to steal some nice brown shares, but then realized that Heart of Dior is going to die. So didn't want it. And basically here in this stock round or operating round, we have basically everybody's train locked. So even though this suitcase can be broken, we're not going to potentially see a bankruptcy because Heart of Dior has 4s, which she can survive on after the 3s rust. But then we're going to see that Heart of Dior decides to shuffle to bring out a 6 and basically is going to self-bankruptcy. So we're going to just watch that happen. The suitcase is broken. The NYNH somehow ends up with a token in Pittsburgh. I don't think I noticed that. And we have the 6 trains came out, and we basically just end up with a bankruptcy in Heart of Dior. The way the trains have worked out, there was nobody in really a position to push for a bankruptcy, but too many revenants is able to dump on Crewmeister, who then turns around and dumps on Heart of Dior, which should not have happened. She has the ability to sell here and protect herself, but basically neglects to. So Crewmeister goes around and dumps the PRR back on her, and now the game's basically over. There's a guaranteed D train having to come out, and Heart of Dior basically just doesn't have the liquidity to survive. But she's going to need 2 of them, 1 in the area, 1 in the PRR. So at this point, we can skip the stock round. The B&M does float, which is just going to push trains even further, guaranteeing a defeat here. It's pretty close between Crewmeister and Too Many Revenants, but because Crewmeister has floated a company into a bankruptcy, this is not going to pay out, and he's going to fall just behind Too Many Revenants. So we don't have to watch that manifest. We can just skip to the end of the game, and Too Many Revenants narrowly wins. So I criticized the CPR suitcase because I forgot that he had the Burlington track locked up. That was my fault. I shouldn't have done that. But I do think this PRR play was very questionable. So Too Many Revenants takes the game, but this was kind of anybody's game because of various errors made by various players. So with all that said, let's just look at the standings here. We have MP Coin in the lead with victories in week 1 and week 2. He is being closely followed by the players that won at least one game in one of the weeks. So Devouring Trade Dak and HJM Quilter. And then Nate was a alternate in week 2, so I believe he gets 5 points as if he won a game. So we have a four-way tie for second place, and then everybody else is trailing. Still anybody's ability to come back in this, but we will have to see very shortly in week 3 if MP Coin is able to three-peat. If he's able to do that, we may have a start of a runaway victory. Thanks for watching, and we will be back later in the week with commentary on week 3.